Hello there everyone, it's me EDJ, Edwin de Jesus, and welcome back to the channel. We're continuing with Unbiased History Dovahati's Rome series. So last time we saw about the life of Augustus Caesar, the first Roman emperor, and now we're getting to the mad emperors that followed him. I believe Tiberius followed him, but I wouldn't call Tiberius mad at all. I think this video will cover like Nero and Caligula, because those are the two everyone knows, right? Those are the two mad, insane emperors. But yeah, I imagine we'll probably be covering mainly them. And man, I guess if so, basically what I know about Caligula and Nero, they're like obviously I think considered by most people, even non like Roman what's that, scholars, I guess. It's like more people know these guys were just completely insane. Like Caligula did a lot of wild things. I think what I can remember off the top of my head is that he declared war on Neptune. Which is hilarious. And then like I think he said he won the war or something like that. And what else? I think what's interesting about Caligula is that I believe he started his reign really like well off. Like he seemed like have a right head on his shoulders and seemed to have a lot of promise. And then like, was it a coma or something? I can't remember. But point is, he went insane. So that was really tragic. And he was eventually killed by, I believe, the Praetorian Guard. I don't remember, but I think his guards killed him because the dude was just wild and like, eh. And then Nero, there's a lot about Nero. Nero's even mentioned in the Bible. For those of you who don't know, I'm a Christian. I actually am going to Bible college. I'm currently in my last year of Bible college, my fourth year. So yeah, Nero's even mentioned in the Bible, like persecuting Christians and whatnot. I believe he may have, one of the ways he killed them was basically sending lions on them. And boy, the most depraved thing I know about Nero is that like he murdered his pregnant wife, found like a slave boy who resembled her, basically castrated him, and then made him be his like, wife, to basically like a replacement. It is the most depraved thing ever. Like I'm like, oh my gosh. And then there's he played the fiddle while Rome burned. I don't know if he did that. And then there's a lot of speculation. I remember people being like, did he actually do it or whatever? There's a lot around it, but like, the fact that it's so believable that he would do that is like, says a lot, right? Like the fact that that's even an argument. But yeah, those are the only two. I'm sure he'll cover more, and maybe some of Tiberius, but we'll get through it when we get to it. So let's get to it, guys. Let's watch Rome. Oh wait, not. Let's watch Dovahati's The Mad Emperor's Unbiased History, Rome.
I was born 75 years ago. For 40 years I have ruled as Rome's emperor. But for all these years, I have never been the ruler of my own wife.
Yeah.
I have seen the borders of Germania, beyond which...
So last video, he kind of covered his wife, Livia, I believe, Augustus's wife, that, basically, through the unbiased lens of him, she killed all his heirs to get Tiberius on the throne. Now, I did some amateur research. I didn't look, I kind of did like a quick Google search. I don't believe it's like 100% fact that she did it, or like at least there's some debate among like scholars if she's the one who went around ordering all these deaths and orchestrating them. And some believe she didn't. It's just obviously kind of just to villainize her. But I will at least say that it is very convenient that her favorite son and heir and that all the others who were assassinated, she had a lot to gain, is all I'm saying. I'm not gonna make any accusations or anything, but it makes you think, right?
Which no civilized eye may see. Behold, in chaos, a barbarian sweeps the future.
Germany. Man, dude. You know, I mentioned a few videos ago that who are Rome's greatest enemies. Like, Hannibal's on the list, but man, could it be like Man, I think the Germanic tribes and whatnot probably are the longest lasting enemy, right? Like the constant thorn in Rome's side. And I guess on another add to the list, Rome itself, because all the civil wars. So Germanic tribes, Rome itself, Hannibal. I think that's a pretty good list. Obviously there's more, and we'll get to them.
This is the 19th of August, the year of Romulus, 767. These are the closing decades of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, and the final seconds of my life.
Okay. Gosh darn it. It was a pretty good intro. Like, very Elder Scrolls-esque. Oh, cool.
Augustus was dead. Having been secretly poisoned by his wife, his remaining relatives mourned him as she made the preparations for Tiberius' ascension as emperor. That of course included having Postumus executed, and later having Tiberius show up to the Senate, where he was proclaimed the new princeps. He refused most titles and responsibilities they gave him, but as he would find out, the senators were men fit to be slaves. With Tiberius now the emperor, he was faced with revolting legions demanding more pay in Pannonia. To settle that, he sent his son Drusus the Younger, alongside the Praetorian prefect, Sejanus, both of whom hated each other. But then the legions in the Rhine also mutinied, so Tiberius sent Germanicus to them. Seeking to live up to his father and avenge the betrayal at Teutoburg, Germanicus calmed the mutineers through his endless charisma, paying their salaries out of his own pocket, and promising that anything they looted in their hunt for Arminius would be theirs to keep. Germanicus then crossed the Rhine with his legions, ransacking the Germans in a righteous punitive campaign, taking Arminius' wife as prisoner and recovering the 19th Legion's Eagle Standard. He then slaughtered his way into the Teutoburg forest, witnessing the purest essence of Germanic barbarity. Desecrated bodies, guts spilled over trees, remains of live sacrificial burnings, chaotic evil at its worst. He had his men bury the dead and honor their memory, only then returning to the campaign. Enraged, he attacked the Cherusci heartland, crushing Arminius at the Battle of the Weser River, and then honoring Tiberius by building a mount with the Germanic weapons captured, which triggered Arminius so much that he attacked again, and again Germanicus crushed him, then building an even bigger mount, honoring Tiberius, Mars, Jupiter, and Augustus. Germanicus then sailed back to Gaul through the North Sea, getting suddenly struck by a storm conjured by Neptune. But not only did Germanicus survive, but he personally rescued hundreds of soldiers by dragging them into the coast. And to end the campaign in good taste, he again raided Germania, annihilating the Marsi tribe and recovering yet another Eagle Standard. If you still don't love the guy, allow me to quote Tacitus. Germanicus did not want any prisoners, as the extermination of the Germanic tribes was the only conclusion he saw for the war. Fucking based. Oh, and Arminius? Backstabbed by his own tribesmen. A treacherous death for a treacherous germ. As Germanicus returned to Rome to celebrate his triumph, he was followed by his wife, Agrippina the Elder, together with his 5.5 children, among them Gaius Julius Caesar, named after his great-great-great-great-uncle, dressed by his mother with a pair of small soldier boots, forever gaining him the nickname Caligula. Also, Claudius, Caligula's uncle, had just recently married, to a woman that would later cuck him. Such was life for Uncle Claudius. The only other one not having a good time was Livia, whom feared that Germanicus' popularity would eventually allow him to overthrow Tiberius, even though he was extremely loyal. But hey, since when has that stopped Livia before? And so she began bitching at Tiberius to have Germanicus withdrawn from the Rhine legions, and to shut her up, Tiberius gave his nephew command over the eastern half of the empire, which was even worse, so Livia sent her servant, Gnaeus Piso, along with him, just to make his life a living hell. He would cancel his orders, counter his opinions, unmake his reforms, and not even when visiting the ruins of Troy was he safe from his bullshit. So Germanicus departed to Egypt to get away from Piso, which Livia took as the last straw. And so, having also partaken of the divine Julian semen, she used her own black magic to conjure a poison for Piso, who then put it in Germanicus' food. Before long, Germanicus fell deathly ill and died in front of his family, striking his wife with as much sorrow as it did anger. She immediately filed for Piso to be prosecuted for murder, thinking that Tiberius was behind this. The Senate happily obliged, condemning Piso to death, and before he could snitch on Livia, she hastened his execution. And just as things were getting bloody, Claudius asked Tiberius to let him start the cursus honorum, but Livia made him forbid it. He had once tried writing a history of the civil wars, and it really put Livia in a bad light, so she kept making his life miserable. The reality was, Tiberius was trapped between his mother's dictatorship and the Senate's incompetency, so he began relying on Sejanus more and more, whom used this to further his ambition to one day become emperor. And with the new heir, Drusus, hating him so much, Sejanus seduced his wife, Livilla, to conspire together with him. Convinced, Livilla had her husband poisoned, and with his death, Sejanus asked Tiberius to marry Livilla. Easy to say Tiberius refused. So Sejanus settled with pressuring Claudius to marry his relative, Aelia, whom would endlessly physically abuse him. Such was life for Uncle Claudius. Tiberius then considered Claudius as his new heir, but he backed off fearing Sejanus' wrath. Struck with grief and endless paperwork, Tiberius let Sejanus bear almost all tasks of state, secluding himself to the island of Capri, while Livia and Sejanus used his authority to either expel or execute anyone they wanted. Livia made sure to kill as many innocents as possible before her time came, secretly advising Sejanus to get rid of Agrippina and her children for Tiberius' sake, which he heeded for his own sake. One night, as the imperial family had dinner, Tiberius offered Agrippina some fruit, but she viciously refused, suspecting poison. Sejanus then used this as an excuse to accuse Agrippina of misbehavior, and her eldest son Nero of sexual degeneracy, banishing them both, and later her other son Drusus as well. The three of them will later be either beaten to death, starved to death, or in Agrippina's case, both. And since we're talking violence, some Jew with god delusions just got crucified in Judea. From here on, his followers would increasingly infest the empire with their sacrilege against the divine Caesars and overall Christ cuckery. There's something to all this, but that's for way later. And now, with most of his family now dead, Caligula and his sisters were invited to join Tiberius in Capri, alongside Gemellus, Drusus' son with Livilla, whom Tiberius wished to have co-rule the empire with him, later marrying Caligula's sisters off one by one, and later him to a girl named Junia, whom died in childbirth, so whatever. Caligula blamed Tiberius for his relatives' deaths, but whenever he prepared to stab him in his sleep, the ghost of Augustus would appear, and discourage him from such a dishonorable act. Back in Rome, Sejanus had become so powerful he was the de facto emperor. He had his enemies, or anyone really, executed without end, had his birthday celebrated as if he was part of the imperial family, and even schemed with Livilla to ally with the surviving Julians and overthrow Tiberius, making him the regent of both Gemellus and Caligula, whom he would later betray. But even Tiberius had his limits. He might not care how many senators Sejanus kills, but threatening him and his heirs was enough. Sejanus was then called onto the Senate, where he was denounced and tried guilty of treason, with his lover Livilla being ousted as well. Sejanus would be strangled to death, and Livilla imprisoned by her mother Antonia, whom had her starved to death. But Tiberius' lack of will to rule the empire was indeed troublesome. So one night, as he slept, Caligula gently had him suffocated with his own bed sheets, at the bold age of 77, a far more graceful way to kill an emperor. And with his great uncle now dead, Caligula was acclaimed the new emperor, later denying Gemellus of his inheritance. That kid had gone insane over the years, and Caligula knew the last thing Rome needed right now was a madman as emperor, later having the crazy kid executed. His grandma Antonia literally killed herself over this, but oh well. Caligula was then received into Rome, cheered by the crowds as the son of the great Germanicus, leading to over 160,000 animals being sacrificed in his honor. During the first few months of his reign, he threw all of Sejanus' old treason trial documents into the fire, pardoned countless exiles and prisoners, reduced taxes to unprecedented lows, upped the soldiers' pay dramatically, and threw several games and parties in honor of his dead family members, whose remains he had recalled to Rome, and buried alongside Augustus in his mausoleum. By then, his uncle Claudius had just finished the history of the Etruscans and Carthaginians, so Caligula celebrated it by making him consul with him, mixing him up into crazy cults that costed a fortune, all for the sake of banter. But as he worked his way into the hearts of every Roman, Caligula was struck with a devastating illness.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, Caligula really did start his reign, seemingly well enough, he had potential, I think. It's just yeah, that whatever happened to him, his madness just got him, and he just ended up becoming one of the biggest menaces. He became a big menace, you know?
Forced into his bed, he suffered immensely, after having prophetic visions of the future and losing consciousness. When he finally woke up, Caligula had realized the truth. He had become a god. Embracing his duty to act as a god, Caligula started a harem around his own sisters, especially Drusilla, whom he treated in all ways as his wife, despite the fact that she was married to the great-grandnephew of Lepidus. To match his divine status, the gods inflicted on Drusilla the same illness that afflicted Caligula, but she couldn't survive the divination process. In order to channel his grief and anger in a constructive manner, Caligula followed on his father's steps and marched his legions beyond the Rhine. There he would crush only one Germanic horde. All in all, his father's previous campaigns had really devastated the area, thank the gods, so instead, he set his eyes on Britannia. But to successfully invade, he would have to face Neptune, the god whose ocean storms had greatly troubled both Caesar and his father's campaigns. Standing god to god, Caligula confronted Neptune in a one-on-one combat.
Okay, I'm loving the... He's not gonna portray him as mad, is he? He's gonna be like he was a god. Oh, I love this series, man.
For the fate of Britannia. The writings detailing this divine conflict have been lost to time. All we know was that after a long struggle, Caligula had emerged victorious, and then plundered Neptune's precious seashells as victory spoils. Having taken too much damage, Caligula postponed the invasion of Britannia. Good thing too, as he just then learned that his friend Lepidus had been plotting against him, all while banging both of his sisters Agrippina the Younger and Julia Livilla. Ashamed at being related to such adulterers, he banished them both, then had Lepidus killed. Later returning to attend a wedding hosted by Gaius Piso, whose wife he took a liking to, so he took her right then and there, openly telling Piso what felt like taking her virginity. Then he grew bored and divorced her the next day, doing her a favor and forbidding her from marrying Piso. That guy was...
You know, I actually read that, like, Caligula would have, like, these parties, and then during the party, he would just take someone's wife, like, he would just take her, and then they would go and, like, bang, and then he would come back and tell... like the husband how his wife did. The dude was a menace, man. Like, I don't know what to say. Wait, maybe I should play along with this. Nah, he was a god, you know. He could do whatever he want. So silly.
Trouble, and everyone knew it. Caligula then experimented by marrying Lollia, but he wasn't into that pedo stuff. So, as a god of divine taste, Caligula married a big-titted MILF named Caesonia, whom he showed openly naked to his friends, casually threatened to kill, and conceived a child with her, named after his late sister. He then came to understand his true nature as a new god, a new Jupiter, and yes, as Neo's Helios, the new sun. Then starting to cut off the heads of statues and substitute them with his own, ordering many temples to be built in his honor, and in time began to treat the disgusting mortals he was surrounded with as they deserved. As Caligula traveled in his carriage, he forced the senators to run alongside him, punishing those who couldn't keep up. Once, as he watched the gladiatorial matches and they ran out of gladiators, he used his powers to throw an entire section of the pleb audience into the arena to be eaten by the lions, so he wouldn't get bored. Whenever he needed money, he sent agents to rich citizens' houses to be executed and their property confiscated, never bothering to come up with some faggot-ass excuse to justify his divine whim. As he watched his prisoners being tortured and screamed for mercy, he would have their tongues cut off to enjoy the execution in peace, telling the torturers to make them feel like they're dying. One day, he had the entire Roman fleet align in a tight single-file formation alongside the Portus Iulius Bay, crossing it on horseback just to prove Tiberius' old astrologer wrong.
Here's one thing you need to do before buying anything online.
Goodness.
Don't spend another dime on Amazon until you watch...
One night, as he received the Client King of Mauritania for dinner, he suddenly realized the whole concept of Client Kings was gay, so he had him killed, and his kingdom annexed into the empire, later sending the legate Paulinus to crush any provincial revolts there, something he would become an expert on. And once the Jews started complaining at Caligula's statues being placed in their synagogues, he ordered that a statue of himself be placed on the Temple of Jerusalem itself, renaming it as Temple of Illustrious Gaius, the new Jupiter. As he returned his attention to the Senate, seeing the sheer stupidity and incompetence the senators displayed, for the good of Rome, Caligula appointed his horse as consul, who proved to be smarter than the whole Senate put together, and with...
Okay, I know he was, like, mad, like, out of joke, no joke, like, he was mad, but him doing that, I think, was, like, kind of like a, maybe not a subtle, but, like, a huge diss, like, my horse can literally do a better job than all of you, which is hilarious. Caligula had jokes, man.
Rome now in his horse's capable hooves, Caligula prepared to move to Alexandria, where he hoped to further understand his divinity. But just as his unrivaled banters and godly virtues made him popular with the plebs, so had he driven his enemies to the edge of envy and resentment. They were revolted by the existence of someone so divine, even more so one whom they owed their souls to. Unable to bear the thought of Caligula returning to Rome more powerful once more, a conspiracy was born, led by a senator named Cassius, with Carrera being his last name, Cassius Carrera. The thing with Carrera was that, as a Praetorian guard, he couldn't stand being a constant target for jokes, being the feminine-voiced, balls-chopped manlet that he was. So one day, as Caligula addressed some actors during a festival in honor of Augustus, Carrera and 2 others ganged up on him, stabbing him to death. You could say that he lived up to his name right to the end, and beyond it as well. But killing the God Emperor, as far as that is possible, wasn't enough. No, he had to invade the Imperial Palace and kill every single member of the Imperial family he could find, including Caesonia and their infant child, whom he had thrown at the wall and its skull crushed. Such is the wrath of ugly feminine incels. But as the loyal element in the Praetorian Guard showed up, they eventually found Claudius hiding from Carrera behind a curtain. Then they all turned to him, and proclaimed him their new emperor. As Claudius met with the Senate, he graciously pardoned all conspirators, except Carrera, who he had executed. So yeah, Claudius is emperor now. Funny that. You wouldn't expect someone whom Livia had raised by an abusive ex-mule driver to end up anywhere in life. But here we are. Knowing that his best strategy would be to imitate Augustus as much as possible, Claudius renamed himself after the original princeps, which would become common practice. To start off in a good light, he exempted the ruins of Troy from taxation, and affirmed the rights of Jews to... Let's hope that works out. He also built a ton of shit, aqueducts, roads, the works. One of his big projects was to try and drain the Fucine Lake, but the drainage pipe backed up and submerged the entire effort. A humiliating affair, but such was life for Uncle Claudius. Claudius then assumed the office of censor alongside Lucius Vitellius, the father of Aulus Vitellius, a really fat cunt, remember that, using his office to purge all of his enemies from the Senate. And yeah, Claudius had enemies. Mostly senators as blasted at how he had welcomed even more civilized Gauls into the Senate than Caesar once did, killing some 35 senators and 300 equestrians in total. It's no real purge, but hey, it's a start. To help him rule, Claudius had some freedmen as advisors, among them Narcissus, his most trusted subordinate, with whom he sought to consolidate the empire. That is, annexing as many Clyde kingdoms as possible, among them Thrace. There, now we can call it Mare Nostrum. And to exploit the fact Caligula had cleared the way of Neptune, Claudius set his eyes on Britannia. As it happens, one of the Briton-Clyde tribes Julius Caesar had set up had its king deposed, so Claudius sent 4 legions there to reassert Roman influence. The path cleared, Claudius arrived with war elephants, founding Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, as the new capital of the province. Among Claudius's legates was a one named Vespasian, whose swift conquest of the western British coast would gain him much fame. Victorious, Claudius personally pardoned one of the defeated Briton tribe leaders, Caradocus, permitting him to live in Rome, where he would become so civilized he questioned why the Romans ever bothered conquering the mud hut from his homeland in the first place. Claudius then had a new son, naming him Britannicus, whom he sired with his third wife Messalina. And man, if you think Julia the Elder was a whore, Messalina was a nymphomaniac through and through. She fucked all men she could manage to hide from Claudius, born high and low. She once personally challenged the greatest prostitute in Rome for getting fucked by the most dicks in one night, and she won effortlessly. But besides being a degenerate adulterer, she was also a cruel hypocrite. For once she saw Claudius was welcoming Caligula's sisters back from exile, she had one of them, Julia Livilla, exiled and later killed for sleeping around with Seneca. Yes, the Seneca. But that still left Agrippina around, together with her son Lucius, a descendant of Antonia Major. Remember her? The other baby Octavia was holding? Yeah, details. But despite her mother's and grandmother's efforts, Agrippina took much more after Livia, from whom she learned all about how a Roman viper should get ahead in life. So to restore her previous status and wealth, she tried to seduce the governor of Hispania, a one named Galba, but she was rejected on the spot. He was blunt like that. Nevertheless, Messalina was getting real jelly at the popularity the Julians had with the people, and since Claudius would never have them disposed of, she came up with her own plan. First, she would wait until Claudius got out of Rome. Then she would marry one of her lovers in plain daylight with hundreds of witnesses, and then have Claudius killed and have her husband take over the empire. Somehow, astounded at her stupidity, Narcissus contacted Claudius, telling him of the whole thing. And while the emperor hesitated to punish her, Narcissus just sent the Praetorian guards to make her kill herself. But Messalina, being a woman, really sucked at suicide, so the guards stabbed her to death. Claudius now had to choose his fourth wife, and given his options, he chose to marry his niece Agrippina, thus reuniting the Julian and Claudian houses. And after endless requests by Agrippina, Claudius disowned his son Britannicus in favor of Lucius, whom, as his new heir, would have his name changed to Nero. I love this part. And to ensure his future ascension, Agrippina had all of Messalina's old allies who might support Britannicus over Nero exiled, even killing Britannicus' tutor after he started to criticize his abandonment, and finally clashing with Narcissus, whom favored Britannicus over Nero, having him exiled to Campania. As his new heir, Claudius had Nero marry his daughter Claudia Octavia, and then recalled Seneca to serve as his tutor. But in time, Claudius began to regret his decision. For his whole life, he had been the target of jokes and manipulation by those around him. But no more. He wouldn't let his wife manipulate him for her own purposes anymore. He would have his biological son be the heir, and there was no... Truly, a disciple of Livia we have here. Agrippina then had Narcissus imprisoned and killed, later introducing her new emperor of a teenager to the Senate. But if what Agrippina intended was to make her son a puppet of her means, then she was beyond delusional. Even as just a 16-year-old, Nero lived up to his Julian bloodline, asserting his will over others. Firstly by scorning his marriage to that flat-chested Claudia, then by openly fucking a freed woman just to show that he could, then simply ignoring everything his mother told him, letting his wise advisors, like Seneca, do the talking. Left out in the cold, Agrippina sought to betray her own son, and so started shooting for Britannicus to be seen as the rightful heir to Claudius. I'm not making this up. She actually went to Nero one day and outright confessed she had killed Claudius to make him emperor, and threatened to snitch to the Praetorian Guard and make them acclaim Britannicus as the rightful emperor. And so, just to spite her, Nero had Britannicus poisoned in front of his sister Claudia, then banished Agrippina for being such a cunt, but that would prove not to be enough. Nero tried to get Agrippina poisoned 3 times, but she was even more resistant than Mithridates. He once tried to collapse the ceiling on top of her, but she got away just in time. Then he tried sinking the ship she was in, only for her to swim to safety to the nearest island. So Nero, having run out of patience, just had a guard stab her to death. It worked, true, but he would forever be haunted by her angry spirit. But in the big picture, Nero's regime would be tested right away in the first year, with the Parthian king invading Armenia once again and installing his brother as king. To answer this aggression, Nero sent the general Corbulo to the east, whom, thanks to Parthia being overrun by rebels, proceeded to obliterate all enemies he found and retaking Armenia. He then returned to Rome to celebrate a triumph, leaving his armies to his legate Pietus, whom was then defeated and badly humiliated by the Parthians. Analyzing the situation, and frankly not caring much about the Armenian shithole anyway, Nero allowed the Parthians to pick the Armenian king, but first he would be forced to suck the Roman emperor's cock for approval, some payback for Pietus. Back to his private life, Nero finally resolved to divorce the infertile Claudia, later having her killed. He then married one of his mistresses, Poppaea, whom had just divorced his friend Otho, so he made him governor of Lusitania as compensation, so he would fuck off somewhere far away. Poppaea would then bear him a child, but it was a girl, named Claudia no less. Good thing she didn't survive infancy. But as far as ruling the empire went, Nero was of one mind with Claudius and Caligula, so he had the client kingdom of Bosphorus directly annexed into the empire. Later, Paulinus would be elected to govern the province of Britannia, accompanied by his Gallo-Roman disciple, Agricola. So yes, back to that god-forsaken island.
Please welcome an absolutely new Crossout, a free-to-play multiplayer action game about battles and cool...
Ever since Claudius' invasion, subsequent governors had extended its borders north, thus subjugating the Iceni, whose deceased king had willed its land to both his daughters and the Emperor Nero. The Romans then came to collect their inheritance, and after seeing just how badly polluted the British gene pool was, the Romans saw as their duty to impregnate as many women as possible with their virile Roman seed, so that future generations wouldn't suffer as much. But denied the privilege was the Iceni queen, Boudica, whom couldn't cope with her daughters getting all the fun. Enraged and beyond jelly, Boudica rallied the local tribes to revolt against the Romans, being elected their warrior queen, and setting off to destroy the civilization the Romans had brought with them. By then, Paulinus was governing the province and conducting a campaign in Wales. But when he received news from the east, he called on one of his legates to join up with him, but the fucker just refused, cowering away from the revolt. Deprived of reinforcements, Paulinus was forced to make do with the overall 10k men he could muster, against the 230k Britons under Boudica. With a rage to rival Dido, Boudica razed every city she got to, including Camuledunum, Verulanium, and Londinium, with Paulinus rescuing as many civilized refugees as he could. As he was pursued north, Paulinus halted the march, sending the refugees ahead and choosing to die fighting. After withstanding the Briton hordes for hours, Paulinus, the absolute madman, had his men form up into several wedge formations and charging at the Britons, killing tens of thousands of barbarians in a non-stop bloodbath. Even completely surrounded, Paulinus crushed all resistance. Terrified, the Britons began to flee, clogging up in their carriages like the retards they were, and slowly getting themselves all slaughtered. At the end of the day, 80,000 barbarians lay dead at Paulinus' feet, having lost only 400 men, and later making Boudica kill herself. After the battle, Paulinus would engage in such a vicious punitive campaign that Nero had to transfer him away from Britannia, leaving Britannia in his disciples' hands. So let's see how Rome's doing right now. And it's burning, badly, everywhere. The Romans tried their best to put out the fires, but after calming it a bit after 6 days, it reignited and burned for another 3.
Oh my
As the flames raged, 2/3 of the Eternal City lay in ruins, countless killed, and many more displaced and homeless. Once Nero heard of this strategy, he diverted most of his own personal fortunes to assist the survivors, but that didn't save him from the slanderous accusations. Once the fires finally calmed down, Nero was left wondering, just who could have started the fire? Who could have killed countless thousands for their own aims? Who could have put the capital of pagan civilization to the torch? Who could have... It was the fucking Christians, wasn't it? Ever since the end of Tiberius' reign, that Eastern cult began spreading like a virus through the empire, dissuading the plebs from the ways of Jupiter and the divine Caesars with their monotheism. Such blasphemy was beyond the pale for Nero. He would do everything in his power to save Rome from the Christ-cuck menace. Starting the first persecution of the Christians, Nero chose to fight fire with fire, having the Christians crucified and then burned alive, using them as torches for his parties at night and as decorative posts for his gladiators.
Yeah, he like did that, and that is insane. Like, the man was brutal, Nero. I think even some people speculated, like, in theology, the Bible, like, some people speculated, like, Nero was the Antichrist. He wasn't, but, like, yeah, I could see how people would think that at the time. He was, like just murking Christians at the time.
Games by day, throwing even more Christians into the arena, letting them be eaten alive by the lions. During his persecutions, Nero would have St. Peter killed, and instigating such fear in the hearts of his victims, a millennia of butthurt Christ-cuck writers would come up with every possible childish slander they could think up about him. And thus, the first revisionist historians were born. So many Christian parasites Nero would have killed that he would forever be acclaimed as the Antichrist, given the number 666, gotten from the summation of his name when translated to Jewish numbers. And while torturing Christians is fun at all, Nero was far more athletically minded, holding periodic Olympic Games for contests in chariot racing, singing, and acting, winning every single competition, every single time. He was also architecturally gifted, erecting a giant 120-feet colossus of himself at the heart of Rome. He would proudly stand there overlooking the city, until the... I don't want to talk about it. Such was Nero's skill and dedication to the Olympic Games he held, his wife wouldn't stop berating at him for spending so much time on them. One day, as she wouldn't stop screaming, he kicked her pregnant belly in a fit of anger, killing both her and his unborn child. But even then, she still didn't shut the fuck up. And despite being such a great emperor, Nero, just like every other emperor, would be the target of a conspiracy, masterminded by Gaius Piso. I fucking told you he was trouble. Delusionally seeing himself as a more worthy ruler, Piso started to gather support for a coup with broad support among the Senate, equestrians, and yes, the Praetorian Guard, growing more corrupt by the day. But it would all go down the drain thanks to a freed woman, as she tried to enlist an officer into the plot, but he stayed loyal to the emperor, and then ousted the conspiracy to him, testified by a senator named Nerva. Nero would then have the freed woman tortured, Piso executed, and Seneca, having been an accomplice on the whole thing, was forcefully suicided. His works on Stoicism would still be respected though. By whom? Well, let us say that Nerva is but one of a very distinct group. To calm himself down, Nero had a friend of his kill himself so he could marry his wife, but she didn't prove to be enough. So Nero, as a man of patrician taste, he also married one of his twin servants, named Sporus, dressing him in emperor's clothes, putting makeup on him, and best of all, having him castrated. It's not like he would use anything but his boy pussy anyways, he wasn't a faggot. But as they celebrated their honeymoon, Nero received word of trouble brewing in Judea. So okay, what are the Jews up to now? As always, it all came down to shekels, as Nero's high taxation was triggering the Semites to no end, and as they refused to pay up, the Roman governor of the province was forced to break into the Second Temple and take all of the withheld tax revenue. Their great temple desecrated, and above all their shekels taken, the Jews threw a great revolt, slaughtering all Romans they could find and ambushing an entire legion to its death. To deal with the Jews, Nero sent Vespasian east, alongside his eldest son Titus. But the Jews weren't the only ones complaining about taxation, among them being a Gallic governor named Vindex, whom also revolted against Nero. Not for his own sake though, but in the name of Galba, then governor of Hispania Tarraconensis. With such treason in display, Nero sent the legate Verginius to crush Vindex's revolt. His men then proclaimed him the emperor, but Verginius refused, staying loyal to a fault. But such loyalty wasn't shared by Nero's Praetorian Guard, whom proclaimed for Galba and then abandoned him during the night. Left all alone, Nero contemplated suicide, but with his wife by his side, Nero chose to persist. As they fled to Ostia, seeking to exile themselves somewhere far away, the sailors also betrayed him, denying their service. Nero then contemplated his options and chose to flee to a friend's Italian villa. There, they would have them dig up a grave for him, lamenting how the world would be deprived of his majestic artistic talent, crying out the name of his lifelong love, Sporus. It didn't take long until the news of the Senate's betrayal arrived, whom proclaimed him a public enemy. As he heard the cavalry's approach, Nero refused to let his glorious dynasty end in such disgrace. As the soldiers arrived, they found the emperor bleeding to death on the floor. Some Praetorians had remained loyal and tried to drag him out, saving him from death, but Nero dismissed their attempts, whispering, "Too late. This is fidelity." The dynasty is shattered. Nero is dead. With the Senate and the Praetorian Guard, they have sealed the lineage of divine Caesars forever. The last of the Julio-Claudians passes now into history. Nero goes gladly, for he knows his death is not in vain. He takes his place with his great-uncle and his great-uncle's uncle. The early principate has ended. When the next dynasty rises, you shall be its witness. The shape of the future, the fate of the empire. These things now belong to me. Ciao, ciao.
Awesome. So, wait. Yeah, that was hilarious. Oh man, I love Unbiased History. It is probably the funniest of all history channels, I think. And, yeah, that was, like, I guess the end of, like, the Julius Caesar bloodline, right? Like, obviously the empire goes on, but I think something that's known is that sometimes an emperor would die, and then Roman generals would just fight each other in a free-for-all until someone else could rise up and then become emperor, and then... Didn't that happen a few times? I could be wrong, but I know that did happen. So, yeah, Roman succession was wild, but really interesting, and overall that was really funny, and I love the way he approached it. And yeah, guys, so thank you all for watching. I will see you all in the next video. Bye, everyone.